This is a brand new Royal Enfield Himalayan, but it's not any Royal Enfield Himalayan. This is our brand new Himalayan. That maybe I said Himalayan a couple too many times there. But this bike is going to be our newest long-term tester. So we're gonna have this machine over the next year, 2 years, depending on how much we end up liking it and how much we end up wanting to do with it. Something tells me that this is going to be a perfect motorcycle for us. Let me explain. You see, we live here in the mountains of Colorado, and this Royal Enfield Himalayan is a little bit of an adventure bike. Somewhere in my mind, maybe in between an adventure bike and a scrambler, because it's not the most over-the-top, high-end off-road machine that's out there, but there's a few things that it has going for it. Now, from the factory, one of the weak points is that these tires, not very aggressive. So sometime down the line, very likely we are going to go to a slightly more aggressive tire so that we can take this bike off-road to places that we have nearby us. Not only trails in Colorado, but trails in Moab as well. And we've got a decent amount of ground clearance. We've got some decent skid plating underneath. And it's just generally a good bike to ride off-road. I also love the fact that we've got these crash bars here. So a few things that are gonna make this potentially pretty decent on some light trails. Also really like this dual fender design up here at the front. It's a pretty cool setup for a more rugged motorcycle.
It's kind of interesting when you first fire this bike up. You gotta be a little ginger with the throttle because you can actually make it cut out. But really positive feedback with the transmission shifting into first gear. And we do have a little bit of a windshield ahead of us. Oh, look, deer. Yeah, a little bit of a windshield ahead of us. We'll see how much that does. But I'm finally on a bike that kind of matches my gloves I always wear. So that's a perk. And today we're going to be cruising a little bit of dirt road. Nothing too extreme. And we're probably not gonna ring it out too much because we're still at 42 miles on the odometer. So we got to do a bit more break-in on this bike over the next couple days and weeks before we really push on that motor a whole lot. But we can still feel out the suspension. From the factory, they told us at the dealer that the rear shocks preload comes set somewhere in the middle, and they said that usually for most people they leave it at that. We've got folks here at the office that are kind of a range of different heights, sizes, and weights, so the adjustability in the seat is nice. Obviously there's not a ton of adjustability in the suspension because this is a relatively affordable motorcycle, so I wouldn't expect a fully adjustable suspension, or especially wouldn't expect an electronically controlled suspension. That's completely not in the cards. But if suspension adjustability is important to you, it's not going to be as much of it on this bike. Pulling out onto the road. Pretty smooth so far. Suspension feels nice and plush, but not so plush that you're going to bottom out if you do take this over some whoops. This is a motorcycle that I'd imagine is going to be pretty decent on some light trails. The biggest thing that it needs is a more aggressive tire. That's going to make a world of difference when it comes to its performance off the beaten path. As it sits, this is a good bike for cruising around town, cruising some city streets, and doing some light fire roads or dirt roads, even some lighter trails. But until we get a more aggressive tire on it, we're probably going to have to wait a little bit to do anything super crazy.
Another reason that we picked this bike is because we are not made of money, and these Himalayan 450s, MSRP starts a little under $6,000. For the color scheme that we got and the options that we didn't get, this one's MSRP was $5,999. If we got the tubeless setup from the factory, then it would have been another $100. And honestly, I wouldn't have disliked having that, but This tubed model is what they had on the floor, so that's what we ended up getting. Something else cool about this bike is that you can actually pretty easily change up your seat height. So if you want the seat height to be a little bit lower, you can move these bars into a different position, and that will have your seat set quite a bit further down. With the seat in that lower position, your seat height's around 32.5 inches, which is not too bad. I'm around 5'10", so I'm not super tall. And even so, in addition to being able to flat foot this bike, I've got a decent bend in the knee, which makes it pretty comfortable to keep this bike upright if it starts leaning. And that's a good thing because this is not a light motorcycle. This bike weighs around 432 pounds, which for a 450 is kind of a lot, especially when this bike only has about 40 horsepower. Part of the reason that this bike is heavy is because there's a lot of metal on it, some that you would expect like the tank and the handlebars, but things like these crash bars, the skid plates, and it just generally being a decent sized bike, luggage rack here on the rear. So all of these things are going to contribute to that weight.
Leaning into the throttle just a little bit, it's actually got some decent power. Even from the low end, it feels pretty torquey at the bottom end, so it's not a bike you have to wring out tons to get motivated on, which is nice for a motor that's admittedly pretty small displacement. A 450 is not huge, but that 30 pound-feet of torque feels like it comes on pretty low, and I like that. Gotta say, this is also a fairly quiet motorcycle. I'm in 5th gear right now at 45 mile an hour and 4,000 RPM, so it seems like it's generally still geared pretty low, and I'd imagine on the highway it will be a little buzzy, and that's something that we're definitely going to experiment with. We'll see how this bike performs at higher speeds, but it's never gonna be the best highway bike out there on the market, of course. Still something that, functionally speaking, you'd be able to take onto a trail and then still use some higher speed roads in order to get yourself back to your house or wherever it is that you're riding to the trails from. It's just not going to be a cross-country bike for most people.
Now, the old Himalayan was a 411 and it had quite a bit less power output, around 24 horsepower, which is not going to be winning you any drag races. 40 horsepower from this 452cc engine is also not going to win you any drag races, but it's quite a bit more than this bike used to have, and almost 30 pound-feet of torque. This bike also has a 6-speed transmission, which is going to help you out having enough ratios for you to not only ride on the trail, but to also get it out on the road and do higher speeds. Even though this is a more affordable bike, we do have inverted forks with almost 8 inches of travel on the suspension front and rear, and we've got a 21-inch front wheel, both of which are things that are going to contribute to this bike's abilities off-road. But then when you're on road, this motorcycle also has ABS, which is great for any rider, but you can pretty easily switch that ABS off when you do find your way onto some dirt. The rear wheel on this motorcycle is a 17, also finished in gold like the front, and of all the color schemes you can get on this bike, this black and gold is my favorite, especially because I went to CU, so Sco Buffs. My guy behind the camera here went to CSU, so there's a little bit of rivalry going on. And if you look underneath the bike, we've got 9 inches of ground clearance, which is not bad. Our tank has 4.5 gallons of fuel capacity, which is not bad, especially considering that this is a pretty small engine, so hopefully, as we do some testing on this bike, we'll see that it's got pretty good range. Now, I've got the bike back on its center stand, which is another nice feature for it to have, and we can take a look at the screen front and center. This is a nice piece of technology for a reasonably affordable motorcycle, and one that gives you quite a few options for configuring. Of course, you've got trip meters, your fuel range, fuel consumption, your voltage, service, engine temp, so quite a lot of information. But there's also configurability in this screen, so I can go through and I can change the appearance of this. I can do a dark theme, which I think looks cool, but well, actually, you know what? I might leave it on that because that kind of looks good and matches the color of the bike. I can also go in and change the configuration of the screen. So if I don't want it to resemble an analog gauge, but instead want to make it a digital screen layout, I can do that as well. So Quite a lot of configurability with this screen, and I haven't yet gotten to spend tons of time with it because we did just get this bike. So it'll be something that I'll be interested to mess around with a little bit more, but still a really nice piece of tech. And to navigate the screen, you use this joystick right here, which is pretty intuitive to use, and then there's a home button on the other side.
One of the advantages of this being a little bit on the heavier side is that it does feel relatively sure-footed. This does not feel like a dirt bike or a dual sport going down the road. It feels more stable and more planted than that. But if you are planning to do some serious off-road riding, the weight is also going to have plenty of its disadvantages. And even on the street, this bike is going to be a little bit on the slow side just because it's got only 40 horsepower. And it weighs over 400 pounds, which is just not light really for any bike. But let's see, 65, we're at 5,000 RPM, so it's a little bit wrung out, and it would be fatiguing to ride this bike at highway speeds for a long time, I can already tell you. But if you need to do it, it's certainly something that it can do.
On the right side of the handlebar, we have our mode selector and 4 different modes. Performance with ABS on, performance with the rear ABS off, eco with the ABS on, and eco with the rear ABS off, and that's it. Something else I was pleasantly surprised by is this USB-C port that's right here on the handlebar, when even so many people in the automotive space are still sticking to the ancient USB-As that I think pretty much all of us don't have anymore. That is actually a really nice little bit of tech to have. And I also want to say a quick thanks to Scott and the team over at Rider Justice. They sponsor this video and the whole channel, and they have for the last several years because they're really great people to work with. So if you are ever in an incident, either on 2 wheels or 4, and you need legal representation, check out the link below and call Scott first because they are the best. I'll also go ahead and fire up the bike here so you can see how it sounds, and I'll take my mic and put it near the exhaust. It's not a bad sound for a single cylinder. It's not a motorcycle that I think most people are going to buy because of the way that it sounds, but as far as thumpers go, it ain't bad. All things considered, this is a motorcycle that makes a lot of sense for a lot of different people because it is relatively affordable. I like the build quality on it. I like some of the technology features that we get, like that screen and like the ABS. This, like a lot of Royal Enfield products, gives you something pretty great. It gives you the essentials, it gives you the look and the feel and the performance you need. Maybe not all the performance that you might want, especially if you've been riding for a long time and you graduate into other bikes. But if you're either a newer rider that is trying to get into a full-size motorcycle, something like this, or some of the other bikes in Royal Enfield's lineup might be really good options for you. Or if you're someone who's been riding for a long time and you're looking for maybe another bike to add to the lineup, and you don't care so much about how quick it is. Now that's a pretty glowing initial review, as it should be because we just spent our money on this bike, so if I wasn't excited about it, something would be a little bit broken there. I'm going to go ahead and mention, as with any other motorcycle that we test, I am not paid by Royal Enfield. We actually don't even go on Royal Enfield events. We don't have any relationship with them to test bikes when they get launched, which is part of the reason that we bought this one, because it's one that we want to test. Hopefully someday we'll be able to go on some Royal Enfield events, but in the meantime, we've got this one that we can ride anytime that we want. So let me know what you think in the comments below and what you'd like to see us do with this bike. Definitely one of the things that's going to be in the works. Maybe we'll wait until we get some more tire on this, but we want to take it to Moab, take it on some cool trails, take it off-road, and see how practical it is as an all-around bike. So that's all, and we'll see you in the next video.